Welcome to Expedition Networking, a special segment of the Networking RX podcast. I'm Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this program. For those of you who are familiar, on the Networking RX podcast, we share information and have conversations with experts, such as authors, researchers, and social scientists. And all of these programs are aimed at helping you learn how to become better at building professional relationships and understanding why they work. In this Expedition Networking segment, however, we're going to bring on successful entrepreneurs and unique professionals and explore their networking adventure and learn how they used relationships to create lasting success. Today on Expedition Networking, we have Joel Goldberg. Joel is a native of suburban Philadelphia and Chicago and has been a member of the Kansas City Royals television broadcast since 2008, serving as the host of every pregame and postgame show on Fox Sports Kansas City. He is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, and he won a 2001 Mid-American Emmy for sports reporting and has covered multiple championship teams in both Major League Baseball and the NFL, and he's built a 25-year career developing and maintaining strong relationships with professional athletes, coaches, team management, and he now shares those stories and strategies with companies and associations live on the stage as a public speaker, mainly virtual in recent days. But he's hosted a weekly podcast called Rounding the Bases the last 2 years and has added a daily live video podcast when the pandemic started. Also has a book out at this point in time, and he's going to talk about that. But Joel, welcome to the program.
Frank, it's good to be with you, and I feel like, like so many podcast hosts, that you set all this up in advance, and then I give you bits of information and bios and all that stuff, and then, as is the case in this day and age of COVID, it all sort of changes by the day, right? And so you caught yourself there with say, more virtual now. There was a time where it was on stage a lot, but we all adjust. And I have found that to do equal work and make equal impact by having conversations like this or with a big group via Zoom. Sometimes you see the faces, sometimes there are 800 people out there, and we move on. So the world keeps changing, and I know that we all want to get back to what we say, I can't wait to get back to the old norm. I don't know if we'll ever get fully back to the old norm, but we're creating some new ones. And as I say often, whether it be a podcast, whether it be a television broadcast, or just life in general, the show goes on.
Yeah, no, it's, you're right. We're going to be in this long enough that we don't really remember the old times. Or maybe we do, and then we're the old geezers out there talking about them. But yeah, you got to go with it. We just have to kind of go with it. Mm-hmm. So you grew up in Philadelphia, Chicago, and then ended up at Wisconsin Madison. I assume you were at the main campus.
Right. Yes.
And I guess take us through all of that. I guess why did you choose University of Wisconsin? They have a broadcasting program, or?
Yeah, they have. And I think probably everybody does. I don't know that. Well, I can tell you what I did, and to back up a little bit, 13 years in Philadelphia. My dad had a job transfer to Chicago. We were pure East Coast. No one in the family had ever lived outside of the East Coast, other than relatives we had up in Canada, and they were more towards the coast too. And so we ended up in the Midwest, and that's been home ever since. So I've been in the Midwest in some form or another since 1985. Went to high school in Chicago, and I think that where I was at high school in Chicago, suburbs up north, North Shore, most kids probably went to Illinois first and foremost, and then after Illinois, you had a lot of kids going to Wisconsin, Indiana. Those seem to be the next most frequent ones. You had some Iowa in there, some Ohio State in there, some Michigan and Northwestern for the ones that had better grades than me,
right?
But I think, and look, I was at a big high school, and we had kids that went all over the country, but those were obviously the schools that were close and were well known. And I went up and visited Wisconsin, visiting some kids that had graduated the year before. and I just fell in love with it. And as I was applying to other schools, I applied to Indiana, I applied to Mizzou because of their journalism program. And really what it came down to was there were no guarantees as an incoming freshman that I would get into the journalism program at Mizzou once I got to my junior year. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go to the place that I like the most. And I liked all of them, but I thought, if Wisconsin is the place that I fell in love with on my visit, then let's just go there and I'll pursue my dream of being on TV there. And never regretted that decision. There were some steps along the way where I saw a good friend of mine that was at Southern Illinois in Carbondale, and they had a phenomenal broadcast program. And where I started saying, boy, he's just doing more than me. He went on still to this day to be one of the top sports radio personalities in Chicago, has been for decades now. And so, there were moments where I thought, boy, what if I transfer to Southern Illinois and follow in his footsteps? But I stayed where I was at, kind of carved my own path, and it all worked out.
Yeah. Well, University of Wisconsin-Madison, that's a great campus.
Phenomenal, yeah.
I've seen a lot of the Big Ten campuses, and it's up there. It's up there. So, how did you're at University of Wisconsin? Where'd it go from there? And these all take relationships. You're already talking about, yes. Hey, I saw this guy at Southern Illinois, and this person leads to that. And
well, a couple things happened, and this is actually one of my favorite stories. I'm a storyteller, but when I got out of Wisconsin in May of '94, I only had one goal, and that was to find a job in TV. I did not care where it was. I didn't care how small it was. I didn't care how far away it was from home. So in some ways, that gave me a little bit of an advantage in the sense that just looking at the kids that I went to school with and that were in the broadcast or journalism program with me, not all of them were willing to make no money and go to the small town. So that eliminated a lot of them, and many of them just never gave it a go, and they went into marketing or advertising or who knows what, and probably went on and had great careers. But most people that wanted it as badly as I did were willing to go anywhere. And so, I always make the reference, and I'm just making up numbers here, that let's say that there are 100 television jobs open in the country, in the summer after college graduates, which I don't know that there are 100 openings, but let's say there are 100 openings and there are 10,000 kids that want to do that. How are you one of those 100? And that's what I ran up against. I mean, this is not go put in all your dues as a doctor and there will be a job waiting for you somewhere. And I got a friend that's an ER doctor, and 15 or so years ago, 12 years ago, he and his wife decided we want to leave Chicago for the first time in our lives, and we're going to the Miami area. Well, okay, go wherever you want. You want to go to the warmth? Pick and choose where you want to be an ER doc. Yeah. That's not the case for a television guy.
Yeah.
And now keep in mind, this is 1994. So cell phones were very early stages, like, the ones that we had in the suitcases in the car.
Right.
Email had just started. Websites weren't really happening. You couldn't send YouTube clips. That didn't exist yet. And so I remember subscribing to this phone service. I don't know how much it costs. I'm going to guess it was $50 a month. Whatever it was felt steep for a college kid or a recently graduated college kid. And you basically dialed the number and you had your own personal code and you punched in a code. And every day, if there was any new opening around the country, they would tell you what that was. And you jot down the information and the address and the contact person. And you'd take a physical tape and a resume and you'd send it off in the mail. And I don't know if I did that a dozen times, 10 times, 15 times, whatever it was, every single one came back with a rejection. And I started to question whether I was going to make it in television. I had a job waiting for me at the local restaurant where I'd worked in high school and college, hot dog stand, and they would have paid me $25,000 a year. They were offering me to manage it. And I thought, but I can't give up on my dream. So I started calling TV stations. And this was a very early lesson in relationships. You talked about that, Frank, and in connectivity. And I don't know that I knew to do this. Maybe somebody tipped me off and said, hey, you should reach. I don't know. And I'm not a cold calling type to this day. I'm very uncomfortable with it. I would rather, I'm great once the relationship is there, but it's opening that door. But I just I'd been dreaming of this my whole life. And so I just started calling TV stations in small markets, and it would be the same thing every time. Woman would answer the phone. Hi, can you tell me the name of your news director? Sure, it's Dave Smith. Thank you. Click. Wait 10 minutes, thinking maybe they won't recognize the voice again. Hi, can I speak to Dave Smith? Thank you. Hi, Mr. Smith. My name is Joel Goldberg. I just graduated from the University of Wisconsin. I understand that you don't have any openings right now. However, as I look for jobs, I'm going to be passing through Terre Haute next week. Would you be around if I wanted to stop by and shake a hand and hand off a tape? And they almost always said yes, which is then when I scheduled the trip to Terre Haute or Peoria, Illinois, or Rochester, Minnesota. I wasn't planning on going to any of those places. And I started driving all around the country in a little Honda Civic with one suit coat and some khaki pants or something like that. Stop at the McDonald's, put it on, walk in, at the minimum, shake a hand, oftentimes a 30, 45-minute tour of the station, even sitting there looking at my tape and critiquing it on the spot. And I started building a network that way without even realizing I was building a network. And then as soon as those jobs started to open, every one of them offered it to me because I had moved to the front of the line.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think what that speaks to is the power of not just the handshake, but having that conversation with somebody, because there probably were a dozen, maybe 100 other people like you that were willing to make the call or, and just, hey, you have an opening, and not willing to kind of,
that's right,
not willing to be the face and the person behind the tape that's been set ahead or whatever. So what'd you end up taking then?
So the first one that I was offered was in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, which is about 45 minutes, maybe an hour from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So
I grew up in the UP. I know exactly where it's at.
So it's on the other side of it's on the Wisconsin side of the UP. If that, I know that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
It's all cold up there. That life is hunting and snowmobiling, and in February's every year in Eagle River, Wisconsin, we'd cover the World Championship Snowmobile Derby, which had people from all over the world in oftentimes 20 to 30 below temperatures. I remember my last full winter in Rhinelander. It snowed over 100 inches that winter, and there was a stretch of, I think, well over a week, maybe 2 weeks, where the high never got above zero. You remember those days, Frank, where it's pretty depressing when the high is -2 and the low is -20, and you got to plug your car in and all this stuff. But
so what you're telling me is Kansas City is your Florida, right?
Yeah, I've become soft now, though. Like, as a baseball guy that shivers when it gets chilly out, I've become very soft in terms of dealing with winter weather. But I dealt with it all, and a lot of outdoor shoots and stories, and days stalking the sidelines as the cameraman slash reporter at Lambeau Field, or going back to Madison. And so, but it was my start, and I know that was the first one. It wasn't the biggest of the small market stations. I think we were last in the market, and but I got to do everything. I got to learn everything. I got to work around all these people that were around. We were all young to middle 20 somethings, and there was no money in it, but there was experience. I stayed there for 2 years, and then I got back to Madison for 2 years, and then ended up in St. Louis for 10, and then Kansas City for now 13 plus. And 26 years into the business, I'm still here and loving every moment of it.
Awesome. Obviously, Rhinelander, that was a lot of legwork. You're driving around, and you're building grassroots connections. Yeah. When you went from there to the next and the next, were those relationships that you had? Obviously, you're not running around in a Honda Civic anymore. You had more established relationships.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I might have still had that same, whatever I had at that point. I mean, let's keep in mind that first job in Rhinelander was $13,500 a year. And the second job in Madison, I seem to remember being around 18 or 19 a year. So, I was living in the places that were, north of $150 a month rent, but certainly south of $300 a month rent, because I learned quickly I couldn't afford the $300. but I didn't have the time to be bouncing around the country with a job and maybe 2 weeks vacation, and that's it. But you start collecting people along the way, and the beautiful thing, collecting relationships and friends, and the beautiful thing about those smaller markets is that people don't stay very long, and so they're moving on to the next place. In the case of Madison, I had been an intern at the NBC TV station in Madison for 4 semesters, and there should be a statute of limitations there, so I don't think I'll get anybody in trouble. But I know nowadays you'd have to get credit and you'd get 1 semester. But they weren't paying a whole lot of attention to that back then, or if it was the rule, they didn't seem to care. So they liked the work I was doing, and sometimes at that age, liking the work means you're not pissing people off and you're not a liability and you're not driving people crazy. And I learned how to edit, and I learned how to do some of the things that they needed to get done. And so I edited a lot of their sports highlights for the news. I'd go out on shoots with them when I was an intern. So made great friends there, had mentors there. And so 2 years after my job in Rhinelander, because at Madison was going to be too big of a place to start right out of school, especially in sports where they could just get better talent than someone fresh out of college. They had a 3-person sports staff and wanted to add a 4th spot, which would be primarily as a producer with occasional airtime. So it was a little bit of a leap of faith on my part, because I did not want to get backed into or pigeonholed into a role as a producer, which is a phenomenal job, but that wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I probably would have taken that to get into the first place. Essentially, I did. I mean, I was producing, writing, shooting, editing, anchoring, doing all my own stuff. So I go to Madison, and it's like, I'm going to give up a lot of my airtime. However, I know these guys. I'm willing to work 1 million hours a day if I have to pick up any slack that they need, which is what I'd done in Rhinelander. By the way, my first job in TV was in news, which I did not enjoy, but I was in. And so I wasn't upset with it. I was out of my comfort zone, and I would shoot news during the day. So I'd work, 9 to 6 or whatever it was. And then I'd say to the sports staff, both of whom are very close friends of mine still to this day, I would say to the 2 sports guys, do you have a high school game for me to go shoot tonight? So I would work 15 or 16 hours a day oftentimes, but I had nothing else to do. And then as those 2 guys moved on, the top sports guy moved to Madison. Now, I got my job back in Madison, but we were competitors. He moved on to the CBS, I moved on to the NBC, and then I started climbing my way up in Madison. Then that friend of mine, who had been our sports director in Rhinelander and then the sports guy in Madison, he moves on to St. Louis. A year after he goes to St. Louis in 97, they have another opening at his station. He gets me an interview down there. I get the job. So, the dominoes just kept on falling and falling. And it really all came back from those drives across the country in the Honda Civic.
Interesting. At what point did you realize there's something to this relationship thing? I get the sense you're driving around in this Honda Civic thinking, well, I mean, did you realize, hey, it's the relationship? What was going through your head?
I didn't.
Okay.
I did, but I didn't. And I'll say it this way. I don't know that anybody ever spelled it out that way to me. And I was just doing what I believed I needed to do. I understood that I was able to open doors for myself, but I don't think I understood the big picture of the need of these relationships every day in what any of us do, by the way. Everybody knows that you have to build relationships in sales, but isn't everything in life sales?
Yeah.
You reached out. Well, you didn't reach out to me. We were connected. But if you randomly reached out to me out of nowhere, I may or may not have done it. I probably would, but we wouldn't have had a relationship. But the woman that introduced us, you had a bit of a relationship. I had a bit of a relationship with. She connected us. It happens in every single walk of life. But I don't know that anybody teaches this in school. And so there should have been a class. There should be a class in every journalism school about how to build trust in relationships. And no one ever explained that to me. So I stumbled upon it. And it really took me. So figure if I was doing all those drives in 94, it took me till 2007 to fully understand the importance of those relationships in terms of what I was doing every day with the athletes. And once I understood how to build relationships with those athletes, which I very much equate to the salesperson or the, mid-level salesperson, employee, whatever it is, of connecting with the CEO. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you go about it the right way, about building trust and relationships and adding value, it's the same thing with the superstar athletes. I just was always putting them on a pedestal, which is a very awkward thing, not just to do, but to be on the receiving end. And as soon as I understood how to get on common ground with them, I couldn't go out there and hit home runs. I couldn't go out there and be Albert Pujols or Mark McGwire or any of these guys. But as soon as I understood how to connect with them, treat them the right way, not be a liability to them, was really the moment that my career opened up.
Gotcha. Interesting. I guess fun question. If you could be a professional athlete, would it be baseball or would it be something else? You said your son plays.
You're about to go there. If I could live a dream, first off, I'd love to be able to skate better. I'm a very, very poor skater and I never played. Every now and then I'll get out and mess around, but I wish I would love to be a hockey player. I think that would be there's something different and unique about hockey players. All the sports are different. They all have their own rhythms and idiosyncrasies and quirks. I think they're all beautiful. Each one has a feel. The feeling of walking into a ballpark is different than the feeling of walking into an arena for hockey. But there's something about being at the rink to me that has always gotten me and always will.
Yeah, like I said, I grew up in the UP in Houghton, Michigan Tech. That's my dad taught, and hockey was king up there. And there's something about being on the ice, and I don't know how fast you're going, but you're going fast, and it's a pretty cool feeling. Quickly before we wrap up, give us a plug for this book you've got.
Well, I never thought I'd write a book. It certainly was not on the bucket list until I guess it was. I started my speaking career about 3.5, almost 4 years ago, I think. And when I started it, and I'll be quick on this, but it came, by accident, and everybody told me, and basically people said, look, you've got all these years of experience in locker rooms and athletes and relationships. You could speak about this, and it beautifully translates into the business world, or what I call the real world. And everybody said, you got to write a book. Speakers write books. I had no idea what I would write a book about. And so I went a different direction and started a podcast. But what happened over the last few years was, in doing the podcast and then doing the daily live podcast, and now I'm starting to cut back on that, but I'm still doing 3 podcasts a week. It's 3 conversations per week, almost always with executives, leaders, entrepreneurs, occasionally a sports guest. And so I started building all of this content. And what I realized was that I had this unique collection of stories from both the locker rooms and the boardrooms, or even the break rooms. And this cross section of athletes and executives and, and every type of worker you can imagine. And one of the questions I ask my podcast guests, is, what is small ball? I asked 3 baseball themed questions. It's called Rounding the Bases, and it's not a sports or baseball podcast, just like my speeches are not baseball speeches, but they involve so much baseball storytelling. And so that was the question. What's the biggest home run you've hit? What's the biggest swing and miss you've taken? What is small ball? The little things that add up to the big things, all in terms of a guest's profession. And the small ball answer was the most interesting one. I mean, we all want to hit the home runs in life and business on the baseball field. And they're great. They're fun. They used to say the old saying, chicks dig the long ball. But I watched the Kansas City Royals win a world championship, go from being one of the worst franchises to an organization that built a phenomenal culture around the little things. And so those little things showed on the field with singles and bunts and stolen bases and defense and relief pitching, but it showed in character and the way they were able to build this. And I started seeing the exact same things in the world of business. And so as I started asking all of these guests about small ball, it started really working itself into different topics: trust, paying attention to detail, finding a purpose, doing the right thing, positivity. And so I wrote a book called Small Ball, Big Results. And it is a series of 13 topics. Each chapter is an inning, so it does go extra innings, free baseball, as we like to say.
Yep.
And there's a top half and a bottom half of every inning, and one's got a baseball story and one's got a business story, and it was a lot of fun to put together.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today. This has been very entertaining, very insightful.
Frank, thanks for having me.
To wrap things up, remember, we're looking for some enterprising business types to join our team as franchisees of AmSpirit Business Connections. Our franchisees work with entrepreneurs, sales representatives, and professionals in their area to help them become more successful through networking and the exchange of quality business referrals in a structured weekly morning meeting. This is a unique franchise opportunity, you see, because these meetings are in the morning. A successful business type or professional can add this franchise opportunity onto what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, these franchisees work the AmSpirit Business Connections model. The rest of the time, they're attorneys, accountants, realtors, coaches, and consultants of various kinds. The wonderful thing is that not only do our franchisees realize a financial gain from operating the AmSpirit Business Connections model, but the business networks that they build and develop become a great source of referrals for their primary business as well. Perhaps you know someone, perhaps you are that someone. Whatever the case, to learn more about the AmSpirit Business Connections franchise opportunity, please contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of this program.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.